The TT-130M is a brand new vehicle that's coming into World of Tanks, and of course today's video is going to look at exactly what this tank is, how you can get it, and of course whether or not it's even worth spending your time and certainly your battle pass tokens to be able to pick this one up. And of course let's get into both the gameplay, where we showcase some really good results and showing off what the tank can do, as well as some of the key things that you'll need to know even if you don't pick up this tank. So stay tuned, this is going to be a really good one. The first question that you might have is, how do you actually pick up this vehicle? Well, it's currently not in the game yet, at least until the release of the brand new season. And with the new season comes an updated rewards with the items for token store, and this is where the TT-130M is actually going to be from. And the TT-130M is a tier 9 Czechoslovakian heavy tank that is a very fun one to play. Trust me, I really enjoyed playing this vehicle. It also comes alongside the brand new TS-60, which is a tier 9 American tank destroyer that will also be part of the reward shop. So you're going to have to weigh up which one you think that you're going to want to get when it comes to the actual items for tokens. So far we don't know exactly how many tokens you're actually going to have to spend to pick up this vehicle, but if it's anything like what we've seen with some of the other tanks that have been available as part of the previous token shops, then you're probably looking in the region of about 25 tokens, where you will have to actually accumulate your tokens over multiple seasons for most people. However, the TT-130M is one of those vehicles that is a high alpha tank, but also gets the turbo rocket boosters, which make this tank one of the more interesting Czechoslovakian tanks that are currently in the game. One of the most important features of this vehicle is indeed its armor model, which is why I want to kick it off straight away before we get into the gameplay and the other statistics about the tank and whether it is actually worth picking up, because the armor on this thing is actually really good comparatively to some of the other Czechoslovakian heavy tanks, and that's not forgetting one of the most special things about it, those rocket boosters that this tank gets. But of course this vehicle has a load of spaced armor, and much like some of the other Czechoslovakian heavy tanks, you have this spaced armor plate that goes in front of the vehicle on the turret, as well as featuring a spaced armor plate on the upper plate, giving you a ridiculous effective armor on that upper plate. And even when you're looking down into this thing, it can be relatively difficult for a lot of vehicles to actually pen, especially if they're firing standard, and it can catch people out entirely. And I've had multiple games where we don't even take a single shot throughout the entire game, bouncing tons of damage and absorbing tons of damage due to those heat rounds that everyone's firing. And it really feels quite nice to actually play with a vehicle that kind of makes people think a little bit more as to where you should realistically be hitting it, rather than just penning straight through the upper plate with premium rounds. And so with the TT-130M, of course, there are a few frontal weak points that I want to cover just so you know when it comes into the game and so you're clued up. And the first one is these areas. Now, it's much easier to see on the visual area. You can see here, it has these sections which are kind of cut out, and this is where the spaced armor is not actually working entirely as you'd expect, and that's because it's now flat as opposed to at an angle like the rest of the upper plate, allowing you, when you look at the live model, to see gaps in between the spaced armor plate, which you can see right here and of course right here, and that allows you to actually pen it through here. But of course it is a relatively slim shot, and when you're looking down into it, it makes it considerably easier. And because this tank isn't the highest profile vehicle, you're going to be able to do that quite easily as long as you're aiming for this area. You also have areas over here, and of course the giant lower plate, which people can hit, but once again, because this tank is quite slim profile, people will be hitting down into your lower plate, which means that it increases the effective armor and of course increases the chances of ricocheting, to the point where most people are actually gonna find ricocheting off the bottom of this vehicle, and you're gonna end up bouncing. Now, combine that with very strong side armor that has these really nice angle on the top bit, as well as having a pretty solid side armor as well, covered by a fairly meaty track, allows you to absorb a lot of heat rounds and of course bounce quite well, and this works really well for side scraping at the same time. The only area you have to be careful of is this upper plate area in the top right, as well as the top left, where you see just left of the spaced armor. So these are 2 points that you can really take advantage of alongside those 2 hole areas in the top of the hull armor. Now you do have a giant cupola which can be penned really easily, but you still need 220 pen roughly, and depending where you hit it, you can find yourself needing upwards of 240 to 230 millimeters when you find that cupola weak point. But of course, when you're using the 5 degrees of gun depression, the chances of people being able to hit that cupola are substantially lower, and so you can actually reliably avoid taking hits in the cupola, as well as raising the gun up so that you can actually avoid people hitting you in that cupola if you use it correctly, allowing for easy bounces and the impossibility of actually being able to hit the cupola. So this is what you should always be doing once you fired off your shot, or once you kind of realize that maybe someone's going to be aiming for your cupola. So with that being said, let's jump into the gameplay and see how it actually plays, because talking about the statistics and everything are only one side of the story. So the first game that we do have for you is of course on Redshire, and this is a relatively decent map for the rocket boosting Tier 9 Czechoslovakian tank, which is the first of its kind. And when you look at this vehicle in particular, it is very good at being able to hold its own against a lot of opponents. It isn't the best when people can rush you, obviously, but it is quite good at being able to get into position early, and from an early position using those rocket boosters you can get into places where other people just simply can't go in a lot of the heavy tanks. And even when you look at some of the other Czechoslovakian heavy tanks from the tech tree, you're going to find yourself way ahead than them when they're trying to mobilize around the map. And although it isn't the fastest vehicle when you use it as it normally is, with a turbo, which I recommend in this vehicle, you're going to be able to get around the map slightly easier and work a lot of more areas of the map quite quickly. So that's kind of where we went with the setup, going with a rammer as well and V-stab, so that we can maintain our accuracy when we're moving, as well as being able to feature this vehicle with hardening as well by dropping off the turbo when you're in those close quarters engagement maps and not expecting to kind of mobilize around the map all too much in the later stages. But without further ado, this game will get to grips in a second, where we have basically the enemy team's heavy tanks coming over to this location. There are quite a few of them alongside some really heavily armored tank destroyers, and you might be thinking that this tank, does it have enough penetration? Well, with the standard rounds of this vehicle, you have 244mm of AP penetration, but you do also get the option of firing premium ammunition, which for the sake of this video, given that premium ammunition is literally just better in every way with this vehicle, you would almost want to be using that anyway. And when you have 300 plus penetration with those premium rounds, and if we look explicitly it is 306, we're able to pen almost every tank that we come up against, whether it's the front of a super heavy or the rear of a vehicle you can pen, of course. So with that being said, you're going to see us kind of working the areas, over angling that frontal plate so that people aim into the side of that plate, and you'll also see us side scraping out to try and use that good side armor that we have with this vehicle, and taking opportunistic shots when you see people overexpose themselves, things like the Ferdinand. And although this tank doesn't have the best DPM, it's about 2,500 when you're using this to the utmost ability, using it with all of the perks that you possibly can, and with all of the equipment such as advanced, gun rammer, and of course using the advanced equipment getting even higher, and bond equipment, etc. So most people are going to be looking at about 2,200 to 2,300 when you're using the standard equipment, and slightly higher when you're using the bond equipment. But what I really enjoyed the most about this tank is that although this might not be probably the most competitive tier 8 in the game, it's still, or tier 9 in the game, it still feels really, really good for being able to kind of hold off flanks and be a true heavy tank, which is something that has kind of been missing. I really enjoyed playing it, and although, yeah, you're going to find yourself in situations where people do have the penetration to even go through both the spaced armor that you have on the upper plate, as well as being able to find the weak point of that lower plate, and hopefully people will learn that a bit easier and take these things out slightly easier within the game. You'll find us being able to really try and take away a lot of the hit points from the enemy team. And so far we're up to 2,000 damage, and we've taken a few hits from various different vehicles, blocking 890 damage, and you're seeing us just try and get a blind fire on the G-Saw who was back in the corner. We're careful as to the Ferdinand because, once again, the side armor is good when you're angling, but it is pretty bad when you give them the actual side armor of this vehicle. But when you're playing in a tank like this that relies on not having the best DPM but having a solid vehicle with high alpha damage of 490, then you need to be at the forefront, being able to support all of the vehicles that you have to make it slightly easier on them and punish those who might overcommit. And you can see us here being able to put another one into the side of the T95, at which point he becomes a one-shot for our teammate in the T95 and he goes straight over, dealing with him and taking him out of the game. And now we have a Tiger Mouse who we can certainly pen with standard rounds through the front of the turret, but the T95 has kind of pushed up right in front of him, so making a shot into the turret, or at least the kind of frontal cheeks of the Tiger Mouse, slightly harder and not exactly easy to try and hit. And although the accuracy of this vehicle might not be the best when you use your vertical stabilizers, which I recommend almost entirely, you really should, you'll find it a lot easier. This is where, however, the gun depression does become a problem. 5 degrees is good for a vehicle that, you know, has such good armor like this one and has a kind of main armament like this one, but it does kind of suck when you're trying to fight up against conquerors who are at the same tier, have more gun depression and slightly less alpha. Yeah, you can find yourself definitely in the back end of that sort of engagement. But regardless, what we have here is essentially a pretty bog standard game, and we're going to try and maximize how much damage we can get in the later stages. And this is where those boosts come in, because unlike other vehicles, you have the option to kind of mop up damage at the end of the game a lot quicker than a lot of the other heavy tanks are going to have, which is where you can start to decide whether or not you want to push in, and you can either retreat or go forward depending on where you think is the best to go. And a lot of heavy tanks could definitely deal with that. And with that being said, having that option in this tank makes this so much better. And this is the point at which we kind of think about moving forward towards the Skoda T50 alongside wherever the Waffle Panzer IV is that's left on the game. Now, with the boosters that we have in this tank, we're going to be able to push a little bit forward. We bounce one from the G-Saw, fully aiming here, or at least almost guaranteeing a shot will hit. And we managed to pen the G-Saw here. But this is where we need to start thinking about round choices, because Waffle Panzer IV or a Skoda T50, with our HE rounds, we should be able to pen almost every single time. And when you've got the HE rounds of this vehicle with 65mm of penetration, you should be able to go through most vehicles that are lightly armoured, so light tanks and very paper mediums alongside Waffle Panzer IVs. And although we hit a very lucky shot at the end of the game on the Waffle Panzer IV, we do manage to pick up 5,000 damage with 276 assistance, making this a pretty decent result for a tank like this, and of course a really nice one to showcase what this tank can do. Now, you saw what the tank can do in a support role where everything seems to go pretty well and where you're just basically farming damage. However, what happens when you're having to take the majority role as the traditional heavy tank and take a lot more hits and be the frontal force vehicle trying to take on the opponents? Well, this is what this game is going to showcase on Serene Coast, and we're going to go into one of the most overpowered spots that you can when you're in a heavy tank that has somewhat decent frontal armor and be able to jump over and spot as well, because this tank has decent view range for the type of vehicle that it is. And so we're going to get up to this location right here. And why this location? Well, it's because we can do exactly this, being able to spot opponents as they push forward, and we managed to get one for free into the Leopard PTA. And what's great about this position is you can remain undetected for the most part. You can see here, can we get another one in? Yes, we can. The reload just about making us able to take another 400 off of the Leopard PTA, low rolling both shells, but oh well, we're not going to complain all too much. And the Leopard decides he's going to throw himself away. The only bit about this position that is a little bit sketchy is if opponents do decide to YOLO and come to this side where they can move up to this location. But of course we don't have to worry about that because no one seems to have gone over here and they've all pushed the western side of the map. And so we can just take this position right here and try and make it work. Now, although we don't have the gun depression to poke over the ridgeline, and because we're quite low profile, what you can do with this vehicle is find positions where you can essentially go hold down by taking up spots like this. And we're just trying to see if the Leopard PTA is going to reverse and we can take him out, because he's holding up the team and also spotting our teammates for any of the TDs that might be sat at the back of the map over here. And so with that being said, hopefully these guys will take out the Leopard PTA, and they do. And that's exactly what we wanted, because now we can pop back up here and not get automatically spotted by the Leopard being so close to us. But there was a few vehicles that we know are over here, because although the Leopard PTA has fired a couple at some of our teammates, they've lost a lot more health than what I would expect, and so there's definitely going to be some guys over here. So rather than sitting there doing not very much, we're going to push up to this location up here and hopefully get a few shots onto some of the guys that are going to be crossing. And unfortunately there's a lot of buildings in the way, so we don't get to do a whole lot from here. So we'll skip ahead and find out what happens next. Whilst we've been over here trying to get a few shots into opponents that didn't end up happening, we've had the opportunity to find out that a lot of the enemy team are now pushing, and you can see the T-54E1 who is about to find out that exact thing. And of course now we're finding that the IS-3A has pushed up alongside the Kari, and we've also got the enemy pushing our base. The game is absolutely horrendous right now, with a 13,000 damage by the enemy team, and we've only done 4,000, which is not ideal when you're trying to win the game. And there's an STRV-103 in the back of the map as well, so we've taken another hit there, which is not ideal. But hopefully we can remove the Kari out of this game, and then we can move on with what we need to do next. So we slow peek this guy, try and get one in there, and unfortunately it doesn't actually end up hitting. The Scorpion is trying to push up, which we really need to make sure he doesn't get to this location. So unlike what most people do and they just try and cross here, exposing themselves to things like the Kari, what we're going to do is lower ourselves into the dip over here, allowing us to get an easier shot onto the Kari, potentially bounce him, which we do, and then push back up into our location over here, and then hopefully be able to remove the Scorpion G, since we're just trying to maximize how much damage we can deal in this game. And talking about maximizing damage, we load a HE round, which has 64 pen, like we said earlier, but also has 640 damage per shell, which is very nice. We bounce a STRV round, we go over, knowing full well that Scorpion's probably going to pen us, but we put one into him, and that puts him on the back foot now, because he can no longer actually one-shot us, or at least unless he high rolls in the Scorpion, and so we are now in a good spot against the Scorpion. But of course we are not in a good spot when it comes to the people who are behind us, and we're going to have to rely on some of the enemy team kind of throwing this game. Given that the enemy team don't seem like they want to do that, it's going to get quite tough. So with 3.4k damage done, it's a relatively good result for this vehicle. And here is the Scorpion. Can we get one into him? No, we can't. Oh, for God's sake. That's exactly what we wanted. And, oh, is he going to come and YOLO? Yes, he does. Will he pen us on the move? That is the real question. He does. He's looking down into us, which, like we said at the beginning of this video, is a weak point for this vehicle, because of course they can look down into the upper plate, which makes the armor significantly worse. we bounce a STRV hit from the side and we push up to try and deal with a BZ, but we don't know where the rest of the vehicles are other than the STRV, who's still camping in the bushes at the back. But here comes a ELC. Now what I should have done here is just back all the way to the water, but even with that, it's probably unlikely we're going to actually be able to get into the water, and we get taken out by the ELC, who was on full health. So we can't complain all too much about how we ended the game. We could have certainly saved a few hit points here and there, but probably we did what we had to do in terms of trying to get more damage and finish off opponents, which I think was worth the trade. It's just unfortunate that the ELC came when he did. Otherwise we may have been able to go and deal with the BZ68 and whoever might be coming behind the G-Saw, and hopefully the G-Saw would have finished the Progetto 54. But either way, the game doesn't end up how we might want it, and in fact they just come around from behind, the ELC pumping the G-Saw from behind, and we end up losing this game. But either way, I thought it was a good example that the tank can still be good in those frontal positions where you're having to deal with opponents as a heavy tank in general, even if we didn't end up the result that we wanted. But hopefully this video has showcased the TT-130M, and my overall opinion of this vehicle is that it is a very, very fun vehicle that I really enjoyed using, and has a little bit of nuance to it since it's the only Czech heavy right now in the game that has jet boosters, and the armor model seems to work quite well in some situations. And if you like and subscribe to the channel, I can guarantee that the next tank you hit will set them on fire.